Well, Chairman Pai, welcome to WISPA-Palooza 2018. Even if it's not in real time, we just thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to chat with us and to talk to our members about what the job that you're doing here at the FCC. You know, you've made the digital divide your #1 priority, and you know, it's great from our perspective because you know, fixed wireless has been a big winner in the recent CAF Phase 2 reverse auction. So can you take a moment just to tell me, just from your perspective, how things worked out in that auction?
Would be happy to do so. First and foremost, though, Claude, thanks so much for coming, being here at the FCC. Thanks to all your members for what they do, and appreciate your leadership of this agency, or of this association at such a critical time. The Connect America Fund auction was a resounding success from our perspective. One of the visions that we had early on when we were structuring the auction is that we needed to broaden participation. I mean, not just put up to $2 billion out there for fixed broadband, but also make sure we had a wide variety of participants. And I had a feeling that WISP would step up. They're not a soft-spoken bunch, as I'm sure you know.
They are not.
And one of the great things is, and I see this over my travels, there's always a WISP willing to do the job. And so when we saw the results of the auction, I was thrilled. I mean, to have WISPs get over 9 figures of funding from the FCC to build out some of these high-speed, high-quality connections at speeds that I think are going to be very much appreciated by those consumers who are connected for the first time. That's going to be tremendous. And so I'm really looking forward to what WISPs bring to the table as these funds are distributed and as these networks are being built.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's you do have a lot of fans at WISPA because, you know, as you noted, we too share the goal of closing the digital divide, and you know, you have done a lot to that end so far in your tenure as chairman of the FCC, whether it's you know, shredding onerous regulations or streamlining infrastructure approaches. You know, we're very appreciative of the work that you've done. You know, can you take a minute and tell us the next big thing or a couple big things that you see coming down the pike from your perspective?
Well, sure. I think one of the things is modernizing our infrastructure rules to make sure that WISPs, that all ISPs, but WISPs in particular, have the ability to get some of the guts of these networks out into the field. Often it's very hard to build a business case for deployment, and the more onerous the regulatory burden is with respect to infrastructure, the less likely it is that WISPs are going to be able to raise the capital and hire the crews to do this work. And so we're trying to update our rules on the infrastructure side. Spectrum too, get more spectrum into the commercial marketplace to allow WISPs to be able to provide some of this high-speed connectivity. Low, mid, and high band spectrum is, of course, what we're looking at, and a number of different bands, of course, that folks have been talking about. And the other one overall is to try to rethink how it is that we regulate some of these broadband providers. I think a lot of the conversation in Washington is focused on a few big names that everyone in the country knows. But to me, the beating heart of internet access in the United States is companies like Ethoplex, which I had a chance to meet in Wisconsin. Companies like Wave Wireless, which I had a chance to meet with in my hometown of Parsons, Kansas. And even the smaller providers that we didn't even announce we were coming. I was in Baker City, Oregon, and literally popped into GeoNet. And I think
oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was great. The guy at the front desk was wondering, I think perhaps at first, you know, what had you done wrong? And I said, no, we're just happened to be walking here for lunch on the way to Hermiston. We just wanted to see what it is you guys do, and just to hear from them about how difficult it is to deploy in parts of rural Oregon, especially when the winter is hitting hard. It's just, it's an inspiration to me. And so those are the folks that we try to have in mind when we make our decisions here. We want to make sure that we don't treat the internet, for example, like a slow-moving utility, that we don't treat the GeoNets or the Ethoplexes or the Wave Wirelesses as anti-competitive monopolists. Just give them the freedom to innovate, the freedom to create jobs, the freedom to link these communities.
Absolutely.
And if we make the right decisions here in DC, I'm confident that your members will take it from there.
Well, we're ready to go. So, you know, I know that you are a huge fan of pop culture references in your statements, and an even bigger fan of The Big Lebowski. So you'll understand this analogy when I say that for us, spectrum policy is like the dude's rug. It ties everything together. So you know, so going back to spectrum policy, how do you see you know, the FCC's current approach to spectrum policy as kind of tying everything together for rural broadband?
First and foremost, I mean, I have to applaud you for the pandering reference. I mean, there's no greater movie, I think, in the American oeuvre than The Big Lebowski.
There really isn't.
Oh, it's just spectacular. Although my wife doesn't seem to appreciate its genius as much as I do.
Either.
Yeah, an acquired taste, I guess. But with respect to Spectrum, we really believe that this is the lifeblood of the internet in the future. As the world goes wireless, I think increasingly it's going to be important to get as much spectrum into the marketplace as we can. And as part of our 5G strategy, we didn't want to focus on just one band or even one low-range spectrum. We wanted low, mid, and high-band spectrum to get out there. And we also wanted it to be as flexible as possible. I think one of the great lessons of spectrum policy over the last generation is that the time when FCC officials could sit here in Washington and micromanage how every little bit of spectrum should be used, that time is gone. That flexible use is the best way to promote consumer welfare. At the end of the day, we think that WISPs are better able to figure out how to stitch together holdings and use these airwaves in a way that's going to benefit their customers. And the proof is in the pudding. It's I think your members have done a great job with some of this flexible use policy, and our goal is to make sure that you're able to do more of that in the future.
Well, that's great to hear. So, a critical part of that rug, the dude's rug for us, is CBRS spectrum.
Yeah.
You knew I was going to ask you about
yeah, absolutely.
So what can you tell us about how our members are going to be impacted by the FCC's decision on CBRS?
Sure, and I understand that this is an issue where a lot of people were divided, and some of your members in particular might not be happy where Commissioner O'Reilly's plan has come down. Our hope is nonetheless, though, that some of the cuts we have made will give WISPs an ability to use the spectrum in a way that ultimately will help them serve their customers. Understanding the geographic license sizes might not be to the particular liking of some members, we hope that this is something that enables them to have some certainty. And if you are looking to provide internet access in a rural county, to be able to use it in a way that is much more predictable than it was in the past. And the renewal expectancy as well is something that's especially critical. To know that you're going to have the ability to use the spectrum into the future and to extend the license terms as well. Our hope is that that gives WISP some certainty too. But understanding that folks are on different sides of the ledger on this issue, we had to make a difficult call. And I know Commissioner O'Reilly spent a lot of time with some members talking about this.
Yeah.
But on this and other spectrum bands, we are hopeful that ultimately we can reach compromises that devote this spectrum its highest valued use. And I'm confident that in many, many communities from Wisconsin to Washington State that WISPs are going to be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, well, this will be it'll be a tough pill to swallow for our members, and it kind of goes into my next question, which we're concerned about balance a lot of times in spectrum policy. And from our members' perspective, we're concerned that when we're talking about a rush to 5G, that we don't lose sight of innovative use cases for 5G, including rural broadband. Especially those rural areas that have no G today.
Right.
So, how going forward do we strike that right balance on spectrum policy? I know you've addressed it a little bit, but I'd like to hear a little bit more of your thoughts.
Sure. I mean, for me at least, making sure that unlicensed is an important part of the conversation. That is critical. So, for example, we're going to be voting on a 6 gigahertz inquiry shortly. To me, it was important to make sure that we had unlicensed opportunities there. In addition, we've looked at spectrum in the 5G range, the high band ranges, part of some of which will be unlicensed as well, and even some of the more innovative spectrum. We teed up a notice of inquiry on 95 gigahertz spectrum and above. It was important to me to make sure that unlicensed had a place there. I'm not an engineer, so I can't pretend to say that the propagation characteristics are such that WISP will be able to make use of it. But if we set the stage for innovation, who knows? There are some really smart engineers and technologists who might be able to find a use case for WISPs to be able to use the spectrum without having to come to the FCC, pay for a license, abide by those regulatory requirements and the like. And so our hope is on the unlicensed side that we can make some progress. On the licensed side too, though, we want to make sure we encourage much more competition. Just as with CAF, we opened up CAF to competition from WISPs because we didn't want to simply go do the same thing, cutting checks to the incumbent operators and excluding some of the companies like WISP that have been doing a great job without these subsidies. The same thing with licensed spectrum too. We want everyone to have a chance to compete for the spectrum. understanding that there might be some difficult policy cuts in the details, but nonetheless that we want to encourage more folks to walk in that door and put in their bids.
Sure. Well, turning to a positive note on spectrum, we're very appreciative that you included in your C-band proposal or our ask for that would enable gigabit fixed wireless in rural areas. But that's a rulemaking that's going to be pretty thorny. A lot of issues to resolve. So I guess just from your perspective, what are the critical issues in your mind that we need to get a handle on in order to be able to make that a reality?
Yeah, there are a lot of steps. As the dude might say, a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. But we were trying to think first and foremost, okay, how do we encourage some of the broadcasters to make sure they register? How do we have an accurate sense of where all these earth stations are? And then moving forward, how do we deal with some of the interests that are vying for this particular spectrum? And this is obviously a huge opportunity, 500 megahertz of spectrum in the C-band. We want to make sure it reaches its highest valued use, and trying to manage some of those competing interests is not going to be easy to do, as I found out. In all of these spectrum bands, you might have federal users, you might have incumbent private interests from across different industries, which is the case here in the C-band. And you're trying to strike that balance in a way that works for everybody is not going to be easy to do. But that's why they pay us the big bucks in government, of course, is to make difficult policy choices like this.
Well, thank you for those thoughts. So, before we go, let me just kind of end on a personal note with a personal question. You're known as a very jovial, personable guy, and but it can be tough to keep your sense of humor and to keep on top of things when there's so much when it's from criticism to threats and things of that nature. How do you keep your cool in the face of all of this? You've been doing this for a while, and how do you just not end up a perpetual ball of stress?
That's a great question. Part of it involves just having my family around and close. It's no matter how difficult the day is in the office or when I'm on the road, you come back and my son and daughter just give me a hug and a kiss, and that kind of grounds you a little bit. Part of it is also just relying on friends, including, I've now talked to virtually every living chairman of the FCC in the past, going all the way back to Newt Minow, who was JFK's first FCC chair from 61 to 63, and to be able to call on them and understand that even though I'm in a much more exposed position than ever before, even though there are things like social media, which didn't exist back then, nonetheless, they understand the stress of the job, and they're able to provide counsel, which has been really helpful. Part of it is also just, honestly, being able to work with people like you, who, even though you might approach an issue from a different perspective, nonetheless, you approach it in a collegial way, and you come with a smile, not with a pitchfork, and that's always favorable. But I will say it's been an interesting slog over the last 20 months. I knew it had changed quite a bit when I was down in Mobile, Alabama, done some great events during the day, and went to this craft brewery to sample one of the local brews. And I go to the bathroom, washing my hands, and the guy next to me in the sink looks over, and he gives me that look, and I don't know how to describe it, you just know that look. He says, "Are you Ajit Pai?" And I thought, even in the bathroom of a craft brewery in Mobile, Alabama. And so I was just glad he didn't ask for a selfie in the bathroom. That was the one thing I was grateful for. But
that's good.
It's just sort of weird that getting recognized in some of these places, it's not necessarily negative, it's just different.
You're a national figure now.
For better or worse. And the only regret I have in that regard is that people bring the mug into it. I'm like, look, the mug was an innocent bystander. It had nothing to do with all these decisions. So don't take it out of the mug. It's sort of goes with the territory, I guess. But in all seriousness, no. The other thing that keeps me going is little notes of support I get and words of support I get from folks like your members to go to Baker City and to hear how our decisions are making a positive difference, to hear from Galen Manners or from the folks at Ethoplex. I mean, those are the things that remind me that at the end of the day, whatever is on, whatever the headline is in the paper or whatever is on the internet, that's more ephemeral. What really matters is setting rules that allow WISPs to connect people with digital opportunity. And if my tenure at the end of this time allows them to do more of that, I'll count it a successful tenure, regardless of what the headlines might say.
Well, that's very good to hear, and we really appreciate your leadership on so many issues that are critical to the fixed wireless industry. Well, Chairman Pai, thank you so much for spending the time. It's been great to have this chat, and we'll have to have you out again at one of our shows sometime soon.
Thanks, I would love to do that.